Good morning. I'm Tippy Subotsky. I'm a chartered accountant and work at Howard Joel and Company. I've had many requests to ask about how people can do their tax returns when they've got children in remedial schools and how they can optimize the medical credit in order to get their refunds or to pay less tax. I've prepared this presentation for you. Please feel free to share it. Um, or my contact details are at the end, so you can contact me if you've got any questions. I'm going to share my screen, and once again, any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Okay, so as I said, today's webinar is about medical tax credits as applies to the parents of children attending remedial schools in the 2020 tax year. The source of this credit comes from Section 6 of the Income Tax Act, where they talk about the medical scheme fees credit and additional medical expenses credit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the medical scheme fees credit at all, but just so that you know that there is a credit for those people who belong to a medical aid that you get for the main member as well as all his or her dependents. Today, we're going to just talk about the additional medical expenses credit as they apply to the remedial school rebate. And you don't have to be on a medical aid in order to apply for this medical expenses credit, as long as you are the person, you being the taxpayer, is the person who pays for all these expenses. So what exactly is a remedial school rebate? This is a rebate for a child that attends a remedial school who will have been assessed with an educational or other disability by a duly registered medical practitioner. The child is therefore classified for tax purposes as having a disability. This allows for a higher credit to be allowed and therefore less tax to be payable. Now remember, your child, I feel like I always have to explain this because people don't want to have a child classified as a disability, as one with a disability. But in terms of the Tax Act, the child going to a remedial school will have a disability. And from there, government or the Department of Finance has allowed for special medical credits for this child. Remember, a government has a responsibility to give education and medical allowances to all its taxpayers or to all its citizens. And when you have to go private, then it's a good thing when they give you a credit or an allowance in order to be able to afford it. An example of a disability for a child at remedial school. This is per the SARS guidelines. A person is regarded as having an intellectual disability if he or she has a moderate to severe impairment in intellectual functioning that is accompanied by a significant limitation in adaptive functioning in at least two of the following skill areas. So what this means is a child struggles through in its intellectual functioning in order to do certain things. So what are these certain things? These things are communication, which is speech and hearing, self-care, home living, social interpersonal skills, use of community resources, self-direction, functional academic skills, work, leisure, health, and safety. Now, we know that a lot of kids who go to remedial schools will often have issues with speech or OT or physio and normally it's not just one thing. It will normally be more. And for example, speech is going to impact directly on how they function academically as well. So the medical practitioner will diagnose and decide, but based on these criteria, most kids, in fact, I would say 99% of kids going to remedial school will fit into these criteria. A moderate impairment means an intelligence quotient of 35 to 49, and a severe impairment means an IQ of 34 and below. This is not something for us to worry about. We leave the medical practitioner to diagnose it and to decide how the child is going to be impaired. And remember that this IQ is a direct response to the limitations that the child is presenting at the time. Okay, so a duly registered medical practitioner is a practitioner who, for example, a dentist, an optometrist, a homeopath, a naturopath, an osteopath, a herbalist, physiotherapist, chiropractor, or orthopedist for professional services. Um, they must be registered with the Health Professionals Council of South Africa and specially trained to deal with the applicable disability. So, for example, um, if the child has an intellectual disability and you've taken him to the pediatrician, while he is specially trained, he's not specially trained in intellectual issues. Um, the same thing, if you take your child to an orthopedic surgeon, he's a specialist, but he is not trained in the specific disability that your child has. If, of course, your child has a limp, okay, or an issue with walking, that is a completely different disability, and you'd be able to get that type of doctor, being the orthopedic surgeon or such like surgeon, to give that kind of diagnosis. There are more comprehensive examples on the ITRDD, which I will go through in a few minutes. Okay, so what can be claimed? The Income Tax Act talks of qualifying medical expenses. SARS has issued a draft list of qualifying medical impairment or disability expenditure. This is in accordance with Section B of the Income Tax Act 1962. I know that I'm an accountant and I'm talking in accounting speech, but just so that you know that in case you need to find out more, there's a lot of people out there who want to go and do a little bit of research. This gives you exactly where it comes from. So it includes transportation costs if the school is more than 10 kilometers radius from home. It includes special education needs schools, mainly for learners with disabilities. And the qualifying expenses will include a school assistant if they are not part of the school fees, a school fees in respect of a private special education needs school, limited to the amount in excess of the fees that would ordinarily be payable if the person attended the closest fee paying private school to where they live. School fees in respect of a public school education needs school, limited to the amount in excess of the fees which would ordinarily be payable if the person attended the closest fee-paying public school to where they live. Now, you have to understand that this is a very new change that's only going to be affected for 2021, which is next year. The 2020 is only school fees in respect of a private special education needs school, limited to the amount in excess of the fees of the closest school near you. So the closest school near you would be the closest government school, and there you can have the difference. From 2021, it will be your closest private school that's near you that you would normally have sent your child to if they didn't have this disability. So, for example, I live in Glen Hazel. There is a public school near me that I use. Its name is Summerwood. And that school is the fees that I use in order to reduce the school fees to the difference between the, the remedial school and the government school. From next year, in Glen Hazel, I will have to find a private school with the cheapest school fees. Obviously, I'm going to go for the cheapest school fees because I want the biggest deduction that I can get. Totally legal. Oops, sorry. Um, Totally legal and totally allowed. And I will be using the closest private school from next year. But for 2020, it's only for the closest public school, which, as I said, in my area could be Summerwood, it could be Glen Hazel, it could be um, any other primary school that is within a certain closeness to my home. Okay, because I also have a child in a remedial school. So what else can be claimed? Tutoring services used by a person with a disability and which are supplementary to the primary education of a person with a learning disability or impairment in intellectual or mental functions and paid to someone in the business of providing such services who is not related to the person being tutored. So you'd need like a specialist tutor in order to claim that disability. So, for example, your child can go to the remedial school. Maybe they need extra tutoring services and they go to a place such like, I can't think of a place at the moment, but there are lots of tutoring remedial places that give additional tutoring to children who need the assistance. I already mentioned travel costs if school is more than 10 kilometers away, travel or transport. So, for example, my school is 13 kilometers away from my home, so I would be allowed to use the petrol or the bus fee or whatever it is that gets my child to school and home again every day. Note, only services that are acquired from an independent service provider who is not a connected person in relation to the taxpayer will qualify. So if you have your parent who is a speech therapist helping your child, unfortunately they're not um, well, if they're not working as a speech therapist, then they won't qualify. If the parent or the grandparent or the aunt or the uncle are working as speech therapists and they are charging you, then then you can claim those fees. So you've got to be very careful, but I think that most people are in the situation where they're not going to their parent or their grandparent or their aunt or their uncle for services. For those who have more specific needs and the caregiver is the grandmother, if the grandmother's only a grandmother, although grandmothers are very important, but they're not a registered caregiver, um, then the expenses that you would use on the grandmother would not be able to be claimed. What else can be claimed? Medical expenses for the taxpayer or other dependents that have not been otherwise paid by another. For example, if the medical aid paid for them or reimbursed the taxpayer, they can't be claimed for tax purposes. So let me explain that even more. You send your child for OT to a separate service provider than the school. You submit that to your medical aid. Your medical aid pays the service provider or reimburses you. You can't claim that also for tax. However, if you are out of medical expenses, out of the coverage, or you're only on a hospital plan, medical aid did not pay for it, then they can be claimed for tax purposes. Something to just bear in mind when you receive your medical aid tax certificate, they will always tell you what are the premiums that were paid and what were the claims that were made that were not covered by the medical aid. If you have submitted to medical aid and they didn't cover it, that will be the line that the medical aid means when they say expenses not covered, except expenses claimed but not covered by the medical aid. If you did not send it to the medical aid for claiming, you can then claim it separately for your tax purposes. I have got a schedule at um, the end of this presentation, which I will show you of how I keep my expenses so that we can see what was not covered and what was covered. In my specific situation, we are on a hospital plan, so I don't send medical expenses to the medical aid if I know that they're not going to cover them. Okay. So when can the medical expenses be claimed? In the tax year in which the expenses were actually paid. So for example, if the tax year for 2020 runs from 1 March 2019 to 29 February 2020, if that expense was only paid, the expense for, let's say, February was only paid in March or April, then the tax deduction will only be allowed in the February 2020 tax year. If the expense for March, for example, was prepaid and it was paid in February, then you can claim it in the February 2019 year. I hope that makes sense to you because a lot of people are confused about what exactly is the tax year. The tax year, remember, is from the 1st of March to the 28th or 29th of February. Okay, so the supporting documents that you will need once you have completed the information in the SARS e-filing, the ITR 12. I don't feel like I need to go through the ITR 12. It's pretty self-explanatory, but if you do feel that you need assistance for putting the information into the ITR 12, please don't hesitate to give me a call or send me a WhatsApp or an email, and I will do my best to answer you as soon as possible. Okay, so the supporting documentation that are needed is the ITRDD. This is the form that SARS expects the medical practitioner to complete. A certificate of school fees that you will get from your school. A schedule of school fees from a nearby government school, which is non-remedial. I will show you what the Summerwood one looks like. The medical aid certificate, if it's not in your taxpayer's name, then proof of payment by the taxpayer of the premiums will need to be shown. So for example, the medical aid is in the husband's name, but the wife is the person who makes payment. Then the wife will have to show proof that she made the payment of the premiums out of her bank account or out of her salary or however it is, in order to prove that she can get that medical tax credit, the medical aid tax credit. All invoices from service providers, for example, physios, OT therapists, speech therapists, um, whatever is not included in school fees and not included in your medical aid tax certificate. And then all proofs of payment. SARS always wants proof of payments. Always difficult to show that proof when you've paid cash, but the receipt should suffice. So if you get a receipt from your medical service provider, then that should suffice. And then I will show you the supporting documentation. Now, there's one thing that a lot of people don't know, and I would really like to emphasize this. If you've got one child or more in a remedial school, and you've got other people in your family that you are paying medical expenses for, all those medical expenses. So, for example, you've got a child in a remedial school, you've got another child who's, let's say, for example, getting orthodontic treatment. That is not covered by medical aid, you can still claim those medical expenses of the orthodontic treatment as part of your additional medical expenses. Um, Another example is you've got your child in your remedial school, so everything as I've covered, but then you've got another child who's going for OT or speech or is on specific medication that is not covered by the medical aid. You can claim those expenses. It's very important to know that because a lot of people are only going to claim for the remedial child when you are totally entitled to cover for all other medical expenses in the family as well. Okay, and the other supporting fees, school fees from neighboring schools, I'm also going to show you. Okay, so what does the ITRGD look like? So this is the first page of it, and I'm going to go through every single page. Page 1 and 2 show the details of the person with a disability to be completed by the person with a disability or the parent or guardian or curator, where applicable. In our case, in this situation, it will be the parent or the guardian who is paying for those school fees, who is paying for those medical expenses, should I say. That person is going to put the information in this form. Okay, so it will be the personal details. This is the person, this is your child's information. Okay, and it's also the first 2 pages are giving permission to the doctor, the medical practitioner, to share the information with SARS. Don't forget, it's very confidential and they're not allowed to share it unless you've got permission. SARS wants to know that you have given permission. I have had cases where the taxpayer has not signed the second page, which is this page, and they have disallowed um, the medical credit in the case of a disability. So make sure that this authorization is signed by the taxpayer, which is you or your spouse or the guardian of your child. Okay. So if I just go back to the previous slide, this one is the person with the disability, where they live. The next slide is the taxpayer's details of the person claiming the deduction. Okay, don't forget to sign and date this. The next page, this is the information that is going to be completed by the medical practitioner. Okay. Now, for most kids who are in remedial schools, most of the issues are actually the intellectual issues, but obviously each child is different and each case is different. Here you'll have uh, an ophthalmologist filling in for vision, for example, or a speech language pathologist for communication or speech. You could have some different kinds of physical therapists for physical or physical medical practitioners, whatever. Mental, you'd obviously need a psychiatrist, hearing and intellectual. Now, you've got to also understand that not all psychologists can fill in this form. A clinical psychologist can. Some educational psychologists I have found have gone through when they have done it, but not all. A psychiatrist, a lot of kids are on Ritalin or Concerta or those kind of medication. They've been to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist is often the one who is going to complete this form. Also, what I have realized is that the school where you're at, those therapists cannot, or doctors or psychiatrists cannot fill in the form. It will have to be an external person. So please just be aware and make sure that you have these forms filled out by the correct people. Otherwise, it becomes a real pain trying to get the right people to sign it off. Okay, the type of disability. This is, as I said, for a remedial child, most of the time it will be an intellectual disability. One thing to remember is that it's advisable for the doctor to mark it as a permanent disability, as most kids remain, you'll see over here that it asks if it's going to be for longer than 12 months. Most kids remain in a remedial school for longer than 12 months. So, in order so that you don't have to go and get this form redone every single year, um, they will make it as more than 12 months, which, as I said, makes a lot of sense. Over here, they'll say whether it's mild or moderate to severe. Um, and based on that question, then they will ask you if it's of a permanent nature, and you will answer these questions. Now, you obviously won't, your medical practitioner will. They've got to sign it, stamp it, and give the date of determination. So there are two dates in this form. There's the date that they sign it and the date of determination. The date of signature is for how long you can use the form. The date of determination shows how long ago it was determined. Okay, then here's the rest of the information of the details of registered practitioner. When you are filling in the ITR 12, which is your tax return, it's going to ask you, did did a professional diagnose a disability? You're going to say yes. They're going to ask you for the professional's um, HPCSA number or professional number, and that will be that number over here. It will also be in the practice stamp. The practitioner will also have it in their stamp. So you should be able to see it in two places as well. The schedule of medical expenses, as I said, this is an example from my own situation. Okay, you've got your remedial child. So this will be from the remedial school fee certificate that you get from the school. Less the fees from the local school. I wrote there Summerwood because that's the school that I used, 4,900 Rand. You can see there's quite a difference there. So this year in 2020, whoops, let me just go back there. This year in 2020, it's quite a large difference. But from next year, it's going to be a lot smaller because they have made it that you've got to compare it to private schools. I will do another video in 2021 showing how these fees will change, how the difference will change for remedial school kids. Okay, then because I've got more than one child, I was able to use the medical expenses of each child. Okay, and I made then a little summary at the bottom, and this is the amount here that you will put in for your additional medical expenses in your tax return. The school fees schedule, this is just the document that they send out for fees. I emailed them, they emailed it to me back. You can email the school closest to you and they should be able to send you the fee structure. And that's it for today. I hope that you found this useful, that you're going to be able to do your tax return more easily. If you've got any questions, as I said, or you'd like a quote for me to prepare your tax return, a lot of people found tax returns very overwhelming. I'm more than happy to give you a quote. Please pop me an email, tsippy@hgel.com, or you can send me an SMS or a WhatsApp or call me. I don't always answer my phone, but SMSing and WhatsApps are really the best way to get hold of me, or email. My phone number is 083 442 3409, and I look forward to hearing from you. Also, I wouldn't mind if you can let me know by WhatsApp if this did help you, and if you found any specific limitations or anything that made it easier for you. Please send me those tips and tricks as well, and I will include it in my next video. I wish you good luck, and I hope that your correspondence with SARS is easy and that you pay as little tax as possible and you get the refund that you need. Have a very good day.